This podcast is sponsored by AXA Farm Insurance. AXA offers tailored cover to fit your unique needs, whether it's public liability or protection for your family home, outbuildings or farm vehicles. Based in Athlone, the AXA Farm team of agri-specialists and regional managers work together to ensure you receive the seamless support you need. Switching to AXA is easy thanks to an innovative online service that enables you to quickly and easily find the best cover for your needs. For more information, head to axa.ie. AXA Insurance Stack is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland. Thanks for listening, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to Agri Focus, brought to you by Agriland with the support of AXA Insurance. I'm Stella Meehan, and today on the podcast I'm joined by Chair of the Irish Farmers Association Animal Health Committee, TJ Maher, to talk about tuberculosis, known as TB. Last week, Agriland reported that 70% of bovine TB reactors derive from dairy herds, according to a senior superintendent veterinary inspector with the Department of Agriculture. The latest figures available from the department, which bring us up to the end of September this year, show that almost 38,000 reactors were removed in the 12 months to the end of September. This was up from almost 26,000 for the previous 12-month period. And €66.1 million has been spent by the end of Q3 this year on the National Bovine TB Eradication Programme. But are things improving? TJ Maher, thank you for joining us today. Let's talk about the increase in reactors in the 12 months to the end of this September versus the 12 months prior to that. The herd incidence is noticeably up. So is the problem getting worse, or is our detection getting better?
I would say, to be truthful, there is no doubt that the problem is getting worse. I do believe detection has improved, and the department have clearly identified that their detection over the last 2 years has certainly improved, and we welcome that. Just on your brief introduction piece, and far from me to question the senior superintendents of the department, but it's our understanding that 70% of all reactors come from the breeding population. Of that, a large proportion are from the dairy herd. But it is, when you look at the figures of the dairy cow breakdown and the suckler cow breakdown, it's still relatively pro rata. But obviously, because we have over 1.7 million dairy cows in the country now, as against 800,000 or less suckler cows, we have the greater percentage of these animals being dairy cows. And certainly within the dairy herd, what we are seeing is significant breakdowns in those herds. And it's in that area in particular, we are seeing an particular increase in large breakdowns, but we are also seeing increased breakdown in suckler herds. But the reality is the number of animals in those herds is relatively small in comparison to the average of the dairy herd size, so you have smaller outbreaks. So I would be concerned, and I think every farmer out there is extremely concerned, because you just outlined the figures it was costing in terms of the overall scheme to date, but that often underestimates the contribution that farmers are making. Because it's something, it's believed that this is something that the state is spending a fortune, and the state is spending a lot of money on it. But farmers are spending over 30 million a year paying for their own herd tests. They're contributing 8 million a year in disease levies, and no one ever takes account of the actual on-farm labour that herd testing costs. Like we test our animal population of 6.5 million bovines, up to a total of 9 million tests totally. So in other words, those 6.5 million animals are coming through the crush twice. And we've estimated that, and we did this a number of years ago on farm relief figures, and obviously rates have gone up since then, at somewhere between 20 and 25 million. So in real terms, farmers are now spending north of 65 million on the TB program from their own pockets. And in fact, I'm discussing it with people. Sometimes you learn that other sectors are actually amazed that there's never any acceptance given to the fact that the farmer actually invests a huge amount of their own time and energy without any recognition of that in the fiscal terms as part of their overall contribution.
That's true. And I want to come to kind of, I suppose the financial side of it shortly. But in terms then of the incidence going up and it being whatever nationally 5 point odd percent, one contributing factor, there are many contributing factors, and you outlined them. There has been a series of meetings on TB by the IFA around the country, but I noticed that certain things which people may not know or may not attribute at the time, but one contributing factor, for example, you just said in relation to forestry, there seems to be a higher incidence around clear felling.
Yes, and this is well, there's two issues here. First of all, farmers' own practical experience has always been that anywhere there's infrastructural change, whether it be forestry removing, road development, greenway development nowadays, that there is a corresponding increase in TB in the 12 months after. This survey, which was carried out with the Department of Agriculture, has clearly identified that post-felling, there are significant outbreaks, and the outbreaks can be particularly attributed from a 2 to 5 kilometre radius in the first 2 years. And then it reverts back to its original area then after that. So how's that happening? Our view, it's very clear. And to be fair, the scientists doing this accepted this. It's essentially wildlife movement out of the forestry area. So the wildlife are leaving their area, they're stressed, they're not staying in a half a mile, they're staying going. So they're gone outside the kilometre radius and they're going further. They're coming into other populated set areas, they're stressed, they may or may not be diseased, but if they are diseased, they're infecting other badgers. And the important thing that was done here was that they did have a balancing trial, which also looked at areas where before the forestry was felled, the population of wildlife was monitored. So in areas where there was a low level of wildlife, there was no corresponding increase in TB. But in areas where there was a high density of wildlife, in particular we're talking about the badger here, there was a corresponding increase in the disease in the corridor surrounding that. And on the ground, that's the anecdotal evidence that the farmers have provided to us for many years.
And in terms of the spend then by the department, TJ, like it seems to be up. They're trying to increase in the eradication program. But what about the largest spend? Is that on wildlife control? Is it on compensation? What's it on?
It's obviously on compensation. And this is very clear because there's two things at play here. Obviously, we're taking up more animals. We've almost doubled our number of animals in 12 months. Corresponding to that figure is a very significant increase in the value of stock. Thankfully, for the first time in many years, farmers are starting to get a reward for their efforts. And beef stock in particular have increased significantly in value, while dairy stock had stabilised in the early part of this year because of lower milk price. From the second half of the year onwards, increasing milk prices, and we're seeing very good start to the heifer trade and cows to be sold for calving next year. So valuations of stock have increased significantly. So there is two issues at play. So we have and obviously the system we have operation agreed to the Department of Agriculture for some time is market valuation. So essentially the animals are treated as if they have been removed from the premises when they weren't diseased. So what is their available market value on the day? And that's the assessment that's carried out by the independent valuers based on the background training they've received from the department and ongoing monitor of market prices. And to be absolutely fair, that system has worked quite well for the last number of years. We had significant concerns a number of years ago that farmers weren't getting their rightful values. There has been amendments to the scheme, and by and large, not all, but most farmers are satisfied that while they may have lost their stock, at least they were properly compensated for the loss of the stock. Unfortunately, what we don't have is a protection on the income loss that they have, because you have to lose 10% of your herd or more before you qualify for income supplement. And the vast majority of outbreaks are still less than 10. So the vast majority of TB outbreaks where farmers are either carrying extra stock, lose 8 or 9 suckler cows, dairy cows, they get no compensation for the loss of income that they suffer. And what's often forgotten is that it's that 10 or 15% of your animals at the very top that are the ones that leave the income. They're the ones that leave the profit. They put the dinner on the table. 80 to 90% of your income is spent on trading out costs or overhead costs. It's that last 10 or 15% of the overall income That's where your income is. And in many cases, TB can take all of that away.
And that's true. And you mentioned badgers there, and you said, look at, I suppose call a spade a spade. Badgers are predominantly one of the contributors to TB spread in this country. And we do have a badger vaccination program. But what I thought was interesting was the correlation between areas where the badger vaccination program was implemented and an actual increase in TB incidence.
Yeah, sadly, this seems to be a correlation that's emerging more and more, and that in areas that were historically all vaccination areas, we are now seeing very, very significant breakdowns of the disease. And when badgers are captured in those areas, there is significant numbers of badgers who have disease in them. And that's extremely frustrating and concerning for farmers. And it was outlined at a number of our meetings. This was a decision that was made by the state to broaden the use of the vaccination program. And like with any vaccination program, it requires a huge level of the population to be vaccinated. And we certainly have concerns that not enough of vaccination has been carried out in the population where it was undertaken, and also that a subsequent growth of the population in those areas, because remember, we would have stopped removal of badgers in these areas when we started vaccination. So has there been a natural growth of the population in these areas as a result of that? And has that put pressure on the vaccination system? We do not have a definitive outcome of what exactly has happened. What we do see very much, though, at the moment is very significant outbreaks in old vaccination areas. And in many cases, the older the vaccination area, the more significant the outbreak. And that has happened, it's happened in Monaghan, it's happened in Kilkenny, it's happened in Galway, it's happening in Cork. And those are also very highly farmed areas. There's good land there. And the farmers in these areas have suffered huge consequences for what has ultimately been a failure of this program.
And what can be done in that situation then? I mean, the idea was to go in, vaccinate the badgers, and hopefully see a reduction, and it has had the opposite effect.
And this is our point. Like, we must refer back, and we often can be accused of not learning the lessons of history. But if we reflect back in 2009 to 10, 12, 13, we were down at 2% incidence. At that stage, the state, as part of political agreement, made the decision to roll out the vaccination program. It's our view very clearly at this stage that we need to revert to a badger density reduction program at this stage. Because we cannot continue to, as I've said this many, many times, continue to test and remove thousands and thousands of bovines and not remove enough of the host species. And there is no doubt in Ireland that unfortunately the badger, and in some cases the deer, but predominantly the badger, are the host species. And this is when the department do go and investigate and test badgers that are captured in these areas, they are finding significant rates of infection. And I often make the comparison. If there was 10 badgers taken out and 2 were identified with TB, that's up at a 20% infection rate. We're talking about a 5% infection rate in our cattle, and we have a significant issue. So the issue is comparative figures. We absolutely accept that we must operate within the rules that govern the badger population, which is protected species, and we have to get licenses in Parks and Wildlife. But the situation at the moment is that we are deteriorating in our efforts to control bovine TB, and this has to be addressed sooner rather than later, because you asked on the spend one over the other. Well, as part of our work in IFA, we have campaigned for increasing the wildlife budget for a number of budgets, and we have that allocation increased up to over 9 million over 3 budgets from 2020 to 2023. Now, we haven't spent that full 9 million at this stage, and in fact we are extremely concerned this year that the department have so many vacancies around staff levels. They're unable to continue the level of activity they had previously because of staffing levels in AOs or farm relief operatives or staff out on the ground. And that poses the question, where are we going to go next year and the year after if we can't do the job properly on the ground?
And TJ, what are, would you say, the causes primarily of TB in cattle in this country? What is spreading it? Because I'm sure you've had many farmers come to you with ideas about birds, about foxes, about God knows what else. But essentially, I think there is agreement between farm organisations and the department that there are a small number really of things that contribute to TB.
Yes. Yes. No, look, I think we are in agreement of the three basic hosts: bovines, obviously, badgers, and deer. And we do recognise that there is animal to animal spread within herds. Like that's just a reality. And dairy herds are particularly vulnerable. They're herded together twice a day. They're part of their milking. Their operational management means they come close together twice a day. They're in sheds. They're milked. They're eating off the one trucks. So the possibility for spread once the disease comes into this group of animals is significantly increased, and the figures do bear that out. To be fair, but we also recognise that wildlife interaction is clearly a significant problem. So there is a situation where we have to have a reassessment of how we were doing both jobs. So we make no bones about it in terms of our organisation. We ask our farmers to identify their sets. We ask our farmers to fence them off. We ask our farmers to contact their local DVO, whatever means they use, whether it's by the Badger app, whether it's by phone call or communication. And I have continuously said to farmers, if you're not a person who's good to identify sets, talk to the people in your area you are. The people who go out hunting pheasants, the people who like walking the countryside, they will know where they are. Their dogs will identify them. Ask them and get them fenced off. That's good farm management practice, and we have no difficulty with that. But the issue we do have is that we cannot do anything more than that because we are prevented by law from interacting in any other way with the animal species, the protected species. That responsibility falls onto the state, and we have to hand that responsibility over to the state. It's our view that the state has failed to do that, and the evidence is quite clear on that in our perspective. We are testing more than ever before. We are putting significant extra costs on our farmers to hold stock on their farms. Like, we often think that, which is the TB test, they only had to test their animals and do another test in 60 days, another test in 60 days, and if you're restricted, go again. But look at all the extra planning that's required on that. Effectively, the farmer's management tool of how he plans his year can often be governed by what happens to the TB test. Do I need to take in extra fodder? Do I need to have extra housing capacity? Do I need to spread extra fertilizer, which is now complicated by a fertilizer register? So all these issues are management tools that farmers make these decisions almost unconsciously on a daily basis. But nowadays, in many parts of the country, the TB test is the single biggest factor that's governing the decisions that can be made in the economic plan of his farm. And that's never recognised enough in terms of we talk about stress and what puts pressure on farmers. In my role as animal health chairman and my committee, and we have representatives from every county in the country, and what they get and what we get is farmers ringing up asking us for assistance and how we get through this process. What is out there for me? Where can I look for assistance? Will I be able to get payment? Because we have significant issues with delays in payment. And if a farmer's cash flow is locked down, because essentially, if you're a beef farmer, you're in the business of straight trading livestock, and that's how you make your money. So if your business is effectively locked down, your income is locked down. So how is he going to be supported? And what can we do to assist them? And how can we assist them on the payment process? And those are the issues that we find cause the most frustration with farmers.
I think TB in general causes so much frustration in farmers. A lot has changed in farming over the last 50 years, over the last 60 years, whatever it may be in this country. But one thing that I find from a generation of a 90-year-old farmer to a 19-year-old farmer today is you will still see them say, why is TB not being eradicated in this country? It just seems to be something that has transcended the decades and just continues, and the incidence of it being high. Now, granted, we are probably lower than we were decades ago, but as we saw in some of the regional meetings on TB from the regional veterinary officers, the trend is climbing again. Relatively low in comparison to the past, but still climbing, not the way you want it to be going. You want that graph to be going down, TJ.
And that's the real concern for farmers. And if you talk about areas that, and a farmer rings me up, I haven't had TB in 20 years. What's after happening? I buy in minimal stock, if any. There was a badger set on the farm there for years. I never touched him. He never did me any harm. I never wanted anyone to damage the set, and I didn't touch it. Why is this suddenly blown up on me now? And that's the sheer frustration. Now, what I would like to say is, though, that there is often the view that we're doing the same things as we always did. We're not doing the same things we always did. The scheme has changed significantly, and we have, as a state, as I said, made very significant progress down to almost under 2%, and we're steady for a number of years. So certainly we need to revert back to that policy. We also are operating the gamma interferon blood test as a way of assisting farmers when they have a breakdown. Unfortunately, it does certainly result in more reactors quicker, but the evidence is that it certainly shortens that breakdown. And as I said, the key thing for a farmer is can he get out of this breakdown to start his business again? We are operating different regulations around the testing of inconclusives. Inconclusives are never sold from your farm live. They're continually tested or removed to the factory. So that's an improvement. We have looked to, and this is part of our frustration, to remanage the contiguous program, which is whereby when there's a breakdown, there are further tests around that breakdown herd. That was to be rolled out from a 4-month to a 6-month program in most cases, except in significant severe outbreaks. The department, well, that was agreed 9 months ago. That's only starting to be rolled out now. We have had significant changes to income supplement payment. Those changes were made February 23. No farmer from February 23 to today hardly has had all their payments because of the delay in getting the IT system upgraded within the department. And I have sympathy for a lot of the officials in the department because they can't get the resources invested in it. And this is why we say there has to be a clear political acceptance that this is going to take further investment, not just around the disease part of, but the management of the program to assist farmers through it. Because if we continue not to put that investment in it, you continue to have a frustrated farming population. And if you remove the willingness or the energy from the farmer to deal with it, if he feels, like you said, we're doing the same thing and nothing is changing, in fact, it's getting worse, there's a sense of hopelessness. And you can't have hopelessness because ultimately you have to believe as a situation, I can get clear and I can stay clear. And we also have difficulties around certain herds who find it very, very hard to get clear. And we need the department to step up here and take stronger action to support these farmers. If they're unhappy that they can't get to the end of it, well, then certain decisions will have to be made. And we are absolutely clear on this. The farmer who has TB, who came onto his farm 99% of the time with no fault of his own, cannot be left to bear all the cost here. He has to be supported. And that's our key priority.
That's true. And, there was mention even by the regional veterinary vets, essentially that sometimes, someone could get the TB-free test, but it's within 6 months. And then, 10 days up to sale, something could happen to that cow, but they have the TB-free test to prove, in the last 6 months, it's a valid test, but then you're not tested 10 days up to sale, and they could have had it at that stage, and then they go to, so there's so many different ways that the cows can just pick it up. It doesn't necessarily mean a badger has come in and, whatever, bitten a cow. It could, a lot of the time, TB is being circulated among livestock herds themselves.
And that look, it's an airborne disease, so that issue always is a factor. And interaction with wildlife is a key factor, whether it's in drinking troughs, out of nuzzling the grass where the badger is digging, out of badger patches where the badger is cleaning its den. That interaction can happen at any time. And the screening test is what the TB skin test is a point in time that the herd is declared free of TB. And the department do acknowledge that doesn't guarantee that there's no animal within the herd that's not been infected. And that's why if there's any suspicion, we repeat test and we repeat the screen so that the more often you do it, the higher probability you have the right answer. And that's the key issue. For farmers, it's obviously often a frustration. As you say, I was tested 6 months ago. I went to the mart, I sold an animal. She went down in the factory, and now I have to be locked up and tested again. And you can accept from the farmer's perspective, that's a huge frustration, his part. He believed, and he did do everything right. The nature of this disease is it can be hard to identify. And also, to be fair, the animals are wonderful animals. The immunity of the bovine means it can often not show that infection, can wall it off, and something happens from time to time that infection then breaks out. But the one key factor that I take heart in that is that from and this is often part of a contentious issue at the moment in animal movements. If you look at the animals that are traded the most in this country, are the younger animals. That is the percentage of animals we have the lowest percentage of TB. Um, and in many cases, the herds that are getting it have minimal import of animals. So while it's undoubtedly a fact that in some cases TB can move from farm to farm, it seems very clear from our perspective that the vast majority of the movement appears to be out of the control of the farmer at this stage by hosts other than bovines. And certainly, once our challenge is always, we have a clear herd. It buys in minimal animals. What can we do now to stop the disease getting into that herd? And that's the key challenge. And that's where our hands are effectively tied by the laws of the land. And that's where we have to ask the department to step up and do more. Yes, the farmer has to be conscious of his own environment. He has to, as I said, fence off his sets, watch his water troughs, ensure that when he has feed around his yard, it's not in an area the wildlife can access it. There are small things that can be done. I don't accept that farmyards can be fenced off. I don't. For the vast majority of farms, that's unrealistic. But there are ways and means that farmers can help themselves, and we recognise that needs to be done. And they are often inexpensive, and it's a thought process. But certainly, the key issue for us is to ensure that we do not present the same level of risk to farmers out there that exists at the moment.
And finally, TJ, not to sound like someone in COVID-19 at the time who was asking public health people about a COVID vaccination, but is there any hope of a TB vaccination?
Well, certainly this is something that's been investigated. It's been because it's an issue all over the world, to be fair, and that obviously in many countries a test and slaughter program has worked. In other countries, it hasn't worked, and so. Within the European Union, obviously Ireland and the UK are the ones most effective because we are the country with the secondary hosts, which are badgers and deer. And it's in the UK the most of this work has been done, but it's also been investigated in other parts of the world because obviously TB is obviously a human disease as well. So in poorer parts of the world, it's critically important that bovine TB is brought under control from a human health perspective. Thankfully, in the Irish context, we have overcome that, but we can't be negligent of our responsibilities as well. So, as part of that, we are speaking through later on in this year with a number of universities in the UK about what progress they are making
because
around.
There's one in Nottingham are researching it, aren't they?
Yeah. And Ireland Department of Agriculture are cooperating there. The key issue still remains because essentially it is the same vaccination that we get as humans. But the key issue remains, how can we develop a marker test that can identify the infected animal as against the vaccinated animal? And secondly, then what impact has this on our trade? So the TB regulations in this country are governed by EU animal health law. And obviously as a trading nation and trading an awful lot of agricultural produce around the EU and around the world, we must ensure that we comply with all EU animal health regulations. So we can't do anything that would possibly put at risk our ability to trade. But I do think it's imperative that we do investigate all these possibilities, because if we are not going to be in a position to manage the host spread, well, then we have to look at other alternatives. And as you said, we've been trying to operate through a test and slaughter regime for over 60 years at this stage. And we are going backwards. So at this stage, I think it's pertinent that we do take a real investigation of the possibilities that are out there. Unfortunately, there's not a quick solution here. And unfortunately, like all things in medicine related, there isn't a huge amount of money to be made because this is a localized issue relatively in terms of the UK and Ireland. So therefore, multinational companies are not going to invest huge amount of money like they did around COVID-19 for research into this project. So I think this is where we have to ensure that all the resources that we need can be put towards it, so that if there is a possibility of establishing a vaccination program for livestock in this country that would allow us to continue to trade our animals freely across Europe and to sell our product around the world, then we have to investigate it, because that might be the best thing to do in the long run. Right now, it's not. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't look at the other possibilities.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we've time for on the podcast this week. It is the right time to be talking about it, and we'll see if the general election candidates are well up on the TB situation in this country, and the next agriculture minister, how much weight and financial weight they'll put behind a TB eradication programme. But thanks to my guest today, TJ Maher from the IFA, for joining us. And if you found this episode useful, please rate or review it on the podcast platforms, or share it with someone you know who might be interested. Until next time from AgriFocus, goodbye and take care.
This podcast is sponsored by AXA Farm Insurance. AXA offers tailored cover to fit your unique needs, whether it's public liability or protection for your family home, outbuildings or farm vehicles. Based in Athlone, the AXA Farm team of agri-specialists and regional managers work together to ensure you receive the seamless support you need. Switching to AXA is easy thanks to an innovative online service that enables you to quickly and easily find the best cover for your needs. For more information, head to axa.ie. AXA Insurance Stack is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.